There's a question that's been nagging at farmers, homesteaders, and backyard chicken keepers for years. Why do some flocks get sick constantly? Respiratory infections, worms, skin problems, one crisis after another, while certain flocks seem almost untouchable. Walk into a modern commercial operation and you'll find antibiotics in the water, vaccines on a strict schedule, and veterinary bills that never stop. And even then, disease outbreaks still happen, sometimes catastrophically. Now, drive out into Amish country. Lancaster County, Holmes County, the rural stretches of Indiana and Kentucky. Find a farm that's been raising chickens the same way for 3 or 4 generations. Ask the farmer about respiratory disease, about coccidiosis, about internal parasites destroying his flock. He'll probably pause, think about it, and then say something like, "We don't really see much of that." That answer has fascinated researchers, agricultural scientists, and curious farmers for a long time. Because these Amish flocks aren't getting expensive veterinary treatments, they're not on rotation protocols, they're not ordering supplements from catalogs. What they are doing, what generations of them have been doing quietly without calling it anything special, is growing specific plants. Plants that grow freely, sometimes considered weeds, sometimes intentionally cultivated along fence lines and pasture edges. Plants that the chickens eat voluntarily, instinctively, as part of their daily foraging. And those plants, it turns out, are doing something remarkable. This is the story of 7 diseases that devastate modern flocks, and the plants that Amish chickens have been quietly protected by all along. Disease 1. Coccidiosis. Let's start somewhere uncomfortable. Let's start with a disease that most chicken keepers have dealt with at some point, even if they didn't know exactly what they were looking at. You walk out to the coop one morning, and something is off. A bird is standing a little apart from the others, puffed up, moving slowly. By the next day, there are 2 more like it. Within a week, you've lost birds. And if you've never seen it before, the whole thing can feel bewildering. What you've likely witnessed is the early march of coccidiosis, one of the most common and destructive diseases in domestic poultry. It's caused by a microscopic parasite called Eimeria, and it lives in the soil. It gets into chickens through contaminated ground. Once inside, it attacks the intestinal lining, causes bleeding, destroys the ability to absorb nutrients. Young birds especially can be dead within days. Modern operations spend enormous amounts of money on coccidiostats, medications mixed into feed specifically to suppress this parasite. Many commercial chicks are vaccinated against it, and still, outbreaks happen. Because the parasite is everywhere. It's in the soil of almost every chicken yard on Earth, so why don't Amish flocks collapse from it the same way? Part of the answer lies in a plant that grows along the edges of Amish pastures and fence lines so commonly that most people walk right past it without a second thought. Chicory, you know it. The tall plant with the bright blue flowers that blooms along roadsides in summer. Farmers in many parts of North America consider it a weed, but Amish farmers have long observed that their chickens seek it out deliberately, especially the roots when the birds scratch around near the base of established plants. Here's what researchers have found when they looked more carefully at chicory. The roots are extraordinarily rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that functions as food for beneficial gut bacteria. When chickens consume inulin regularly, it stimulates the growth of a healthy microbiome in the intestinal tract. And a well-populated, balanced gut microbiome is physically crowded. There's less room, less opportunity for Eimeria to establish itself and proliferate. It's not that chicory kills the coccidiosis parasite directly. It's that a chicken with a robust, well-fed gut ecosystem is far more resistant to the invasion in the first place. There's more to it. Chicory also contains sesquiterpene lactones, bitter compounds that have shown measurable antiparasitic properties in multiple studies. Animals consuming chicory regularly show reduced parasite loads across several species. Sheep farmers in Europe have used chicory pastures deliberately to reduce worm burdens. The mechanism works for chickens too. Amish farmers don't analyze this biochemically. They just notice that chickens left to range near chicory are healthier. So they let it grow. Sometimes they scatter seed along fence lines intentionally. It becomes part of the landscape of the farm, unassuming, ordinary, quietly essential. The plant costs nothing. It grows without irrigation. It survives drought, comes back year after year, and the chickens find it on their own. Disease 2. Infectious bronchitis. Now move from the gut to the lungs. Because if coccidiosis is the great destroyer of young birds, there's another threat that hangs over flocks at every age. One that spreads invisibly through the air, through shared water, through the breath of a single sick bird. Infectious bronchitis. A respiratory disease caused by a coronavirus, a different one than most people think of today, but a coronavirus nonetheless, that spreads with alarming speed through a flock. The signs are unmistakable once you know them. Gasping, rattling breath, watery eyes, nasal discharge. A flock that was completely fine 3 days ago suddenly sounds like it's breathing through wet paper. In laying hens, infectious bronchitis doesn't just make birds sick, it wrecks egg production for weeks. It can permanently damage the reproductive tract of young pullets infected before they begin laying. And it circulates freely in the environment, especially in cold months when chickens are housed close together. Vaccines exist, they're widely used in commercial operations, but vaccine strains don't always match circulating strains, and immunity isn't perfect or permanent. The Amish approach to respiratory health in general involves something that most modern chicken operations almost never provide, and it grows freely in nearly every temperate climate on Earth. Elderberry, the elder tree, Sambucus nigra, grows wild along stream banks, at the edges of forests, in the disturbed soil around old farm buildings. Amish farms often have elder bushes growing semi-wild around the property, sometimes deliberately maintained, sometimes simply left alone because the farmers know what they're good for. Elderberries have become famous in human wellness circles in recent years, but their use in animal health is far older and far less discussed. Amish farmers have long given elderberry preparations to sick animals, and they allow chickens to forage freely beneath elder bushes when the berries drop. What elderberry contains that matters most here is a group of flavonoids, particularly quercetin, rutin, and camphorol, that have demonstrated genuine antiviral activity in laboratory studies. These compounds interfere with the ability of certain viruses to replicate inside host cells. They appear to block the hemagglutinin proteins that viruses use to attach to and penetrate respiratory cells. Beyond the direct antiviral properties, elderberry is extraordinarily rich in vitamin C, a nutrient that chickens can synthesize themselves, but under stress or illness, synthesis drops sharply. Supplementing through natural food sources during high-stress periods like cold weather or heavy laying cycles helps maintain immune function at a level that makes viral infection harder to establish. The leaves, the bark, and unripe berries of elderberry are actually mildly toxic to chickens in large quantities. This is worth knowing. But ripe berries are safe and beneficial. Amish farmers understand this intuitively through generations of observation. The chickens free-ranging under elder bushes eat what's ripe and leave the rest. There's a larger principle at work here that will keep appearing as we go deeper into this story. The plants aren't doing one thing, they're doing many things simultaneously, providing specific protective compounds, supporting immune readiness, supplying vitamins that are depleted under stress. The effect is layered, redundant, and remarkably durable. The next disease takes us into territory that most backyard chicken keepers don't think about until it's already too late. Disease 3. Marek's disease. Marek's disease, named after a Hungarian veterinarian who identified it in the early 20th century. It's caused by a herpes virus, and unlike most chicken diseases, it's not going away because of good management or cleaner coops. It's present in the dust and dander of chickens themselves. It can survive in the environment for months, even years. Virtually every flock in the world is exposed to it. What Marek does inside a bird is unsettling. It causes tumors, not just in the organs, though that happens, but in the nerves. The brachial plexus, the sciatic nerve. You'll see a bird walking with one leg extended forward and one backward, the classic Marek split. You'll see paralysis of wings, blindness, and eventually, death. Commercial operations vaccinate against Marek's as a matter of absolute routine. The vaccine doesn't prevent infection, it prevents the most severe clinical disease, but it doesn't stop the virus from circulating. Now, here's something that doesn't get discussed enough. Individual variation in Marek's susceptibility is enormous. Some birds in an infected flock develop devastating tumors and die. Others in the exact same flock exposed to the exact same virus, develop no symptoms at all. The difference isn't the vaccination status, it's the immune competence of the individual bird. Which brings us to a plant that Amish farmers grow deliberately, that chickens forage through eagerly, and that delivers something almost no commercial feed provides in meaningful quantities. Stinging nettle. The plant that most people avoid because touching it hurts. The plant that grows prolifically on disturbed soil, around old barns, along fence lines where organic matter accumulates. The plant that Amish farmers have harvested for centuries, for their own use and for their animals. Dried nettle loses its sting entirely and becomes safe and extraordinarily nutritious. Fresh nettle wilted briefly, crushed under boots or briefly scalded, also neutralizes the formic acid in the stinging hairs. What does nettle deliver that matters for Marek's disease? The connection runs through immune function. Nettle is one of the richest plant sources of iron available to chickens. It contains significant levels of vitamin K, which plays roles beyond blood clotting. It's involved in cellular signaling within the immune system. It contains beta-sitosterol, a plant sterol with demonstrated immune-modulating properties, and it provides chlorophyll in extremely high concentration, which in the gut converts to compounds that have shown activity against certain herpes virus strains in preliminary research. More practically, the nettle appears to support the thymus gland, the organ responsible for T-cell production and maturation. T-cells are a primary defense against herpes virus infections. A bird with a well-functioning, well-supported thymus is better equipped to contain Marek's virus before it causes neurological damage. Amish farmers often harvest nettle by the armful, wilt it, and throw it to their chickens, especially in spring when fresh green growth is available after the nutritional scarcity of winter. The chickens eat it enthusiastically, and the farmers have observed for generations that their flocks seem resilient in ways they can't fully explain but trust completely. Science is slowly catching up to what experience already knew. We're halfway through our 7 diseases. Let's pause for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Because there's a pattern forming here, and it's worth naming. The diseases we've covered so far, Coccidiosis, infectious bronchitis, Marek's, are not rare. They're not exotic. They're the bread and butter illnesses of chicken flocks everywhere. And the modern solution to all of them involves pharmaceutical intervention, vaccination programs, and management protocols that require ongoing expense and expertise. The Amish solution involves plants that grow at the edges of things, fence lines, stream banks, disturbed soil around old buildings, places that modern farmers typically spray with herbicide or mow down because they look untidy. Every time we kill a weed, we might be eliminating something a chicken would have sought out instinctively to protect its own health. Keep that thought in mind as we continue. The 4th disease on our list causes significant losses in young pullets and is responsible for dramatic drops in egg production in laying flocks. It's one of the more insidious problems in poultry keeping because it often progresses quietly before the damage becomes visible. Disease 4. Fowl typhoid and Pullorum. Disease fowl typhoid and Pullorum disease, both caused by strains of Salmonella bacteria, attack the digestive system, the liver, and the spleen. In young birds, they cause high mortality. In adult hens, they cause a kind of chronic wasting. Birds that eat but don't thrive, lay inconsistently, gradually decline. Salmonella bacteria are persistent. They live in soil, in feed, in water, on the skin of rodents who travel through chicken coops at night. Controlling them in a commercial context means strict biosecurity. Our regular testing, culling of positive birds, and significant management overhead. On Amish farms, where a single flock might free range across a substantial area shared with other farm animals, biosecurity in the conventional sense is essentially non-existent. And yet salmonella-related mortality tends to be low, consistently low, generation after generation. One significant reason is a plant that grows enthusiastically in almost any soil type and that most chicken keepers have in their area without knowing its value. Wormwood, Artemisia absinthium. Not Artemisia in general, the genus is enormous, but specifically wormwood, the intensely bitter, silver-leaved perennial that traditional farmers across Europe, the Middle East, and eventually America have used for animal health for centuries. Wormwood contains a compound called thujone, and more importantly, artemisinin and absinthin, bitter sesquiterpene lactones with potent antimicrobial and antiprotozoal properties that have been confirmed in modern laboratory research. Artemisinin is the same compound that became the basis of the most effective modern malaria drugs. Its relatives in wormwood act against a range of bacterial pathogens, including several Salmonella strains. Chickens consuming wormwood don't eat large quantities. The bitterness serves as its own regulator, and the plant contains compounds that are harmful in large doses. But small, regular exposure through foraging gives a meaningful antimicrobial effect in the gastrointestinal tract. It creates an environment in the gut that is less hospitable to pathogenic bacteria while leaving the beneficial bacterial populations largely intact. Amish farmers typically grow wormwood deliberately along fence lines and at the borders of the chicken yard. They know not to plant it where chickens will have unlimited access to large quantities, but they know that chickens allowed to forage near it regularly seem to have better gut health, more robust appetites, and lower instances of the kind of slow decline associated with chronic bacterial infection. The smell of wormwood also repels certain insects, including mites, which we'll return to shortly. The plant does several jobs at once, as the best plants usually do. The fifth disease brings us to something that experienced chicken keepers know intimately as one of the most frustrating and persistent problems in poultry keeping. Disease 5. Internal parasites, worms, Ascaridia, the large roundworm. The heterachus, the cecal worm that also carries the organism causing blackhead disease. Capillaria, the hairworm that embeds in the intestinal lining and causes devastating chronic damage. These parasites cycle through soil, through earthworms, through insects. Free-ranging birds are exposed constantly, and once a worm burden becomes heavy, the effects on a flock are severe. Weight loss, poor feathering, dropped egg production, increased susceptibility to secondary infections, eventual death in severe cases. Commercial operations manage worms with anthelmintic drugs, dewormers given on rotation. It works mostly, though resistance is developing. Organic and pastured operations face a harder problem. Chemical dewormers disqualify organic certification. And natural resistance in commercial breeds is generally low because it was never selected for. What was selected for, in traditional breeds on traditional farms, was exposure to a diverse landscape that included natural anthelmintic plants, plants that chemically discourage worm development, interfere with worm reproduction, or stimulate the gut environment in ways that reduce worm establishment. Among the most effective of these, observed on Amish farms and supported by a growing body of scientific research, is a plant most people in North America either pull from their gardens or never notice at all. Black cumin, Nigella sativa. Also called nigella, or in older traditions, the seed of blessing. It's an annual plant with delicate feathery foliage and pale blue flowers. It grows easily from seed, self-sows readily, and produces prodigious quantities of small black seeds that are extraordinarily medicinally active. The active compound in black cumin seeds is thymoquinone, and the research on thymoquinone's anthelmintic effects is genuinely remarkable. Multiple studies have shown that thymoquinone interferes with the neuromuscular function of intestinal worms, effectively paralyzing them and allowing the gut to expel them. It inhibits worm egg hatching. And it does this without the resistance development associated with pharmaceutical dewormers because its mechanism of action is fundamentally different. Chickens given access to black cumin seeds forage them willingly. Amish farmers scatter seeds in foraging areas, incorporate dried plant material into bedding, and sometimes add seeds directly to feed during seasons when worm pressure is highest, late summer and early fall, when soil parasite loads peak. The effects on worm burden are measurable. Farms using black cumin consistently report cleaner gut health in their birds, better feathering, steadier weight gain, and dramatically less of the classic wormy look, the sunken breast, dull eyes, and sluggish movement of a heavily parasitized bird. The sixth disease takes us back to the respiratory system, but to a different, more complex problem than infectious bronchitis, one that causes serious losses in mature flocks and is particularly devastating in breeding stock. Disease 6. Mycoplasma Gallisepticum, chronic respiratory disease. Mycoplasma Gallisepticum, chronic respiratory disease. It's a bacterial infection, but not a typical one. Mycoplasma bacteria lack a cell wall, which makes them naturally resistant to many common antibiotics. They infect the trachea, the air sacs, the sinuses. A bird with mycoplasma shows the classic signs: rattling, bubbling around the eyes, swollen sinuses, reduced airflow. But what's more insidious is that many birds carry mycoplasma without showing severe symptoms. They're silent reservoirs, shedding bacteria to the rest of the flock continuously, causing chronic low-level production losses that farmers often attribute to other causes. Once mycoplasma enters a flock, eliminating it is extraordinarily difficult. Antibiotics suppress it temporarily. It comes back when treatment stops. Commercial operations manage it through closed flock policies, rigorous biosecurity, and a constant low-level war of medication. On traditional farms with open ranges and mixed-age flocks, mycoplasma management should theoretically be a disaster. The conditions that spread it are everywhere. And yet, Amish flocks with confirmed mycoplasma exposure consistently show milder clinical disease, lower mortality, and faster natural recovery than conventional flocks in similar situations. Part of that difference is almost certainly attributable to a plant that grows aggressively as a perennial in most temperate climates and that generations of Amish farmers have deliberately established in their chicken yards. Garlic mustard? No. Lemon balm. Getting warmer. The plant is thyme. Thymus vulgaris, not just the culinary herb in the garden. Thyme planted as ground cover, allowed to spread through the foraging area. And growing in mats between rocks and along sunny fence lines where the chickens walk through it constantly, brushing against it, pecking at it. Thyme contains carvacrol and thymol, two phenolic compounds that are among the most potent natural antimicrobials known. And unlike many natural compounds that work in laboratory conditions but lose effectiveness in biological systems, thymol has been specifically studied for activity against Mycoplasma gallisepticum. The results showed meaningful inhibition of mycoplasma growth even at relatively low concentrations. The delivery mechanism is elegant. Chickens walking through thyme crush it. The volatile oils are released. The birds inhale these oils as they peck at the ground, effectively delivering antimicrobial compounds directly to the respiratory tissues where mycoplasma establishes itself. They also consume small quantities of the plant when they peck at it during foraging. Beyond the direct antimicrobial effect, thymol has demonstrated anti-inflammatory properties in the respiratory epithelium, the delicate tissue lining the airways that mycoplasma damages. Birds with lower airway inflammation mount more effective immune responses and recover from infections faster. Thyme ground cover costs almost nothing to establish. It's drought-tolerant, cold-hardy, spreading. Once planted, it needs almost no attention, and it works continuously, passively, simply by being present where chickens walk. We've covered 6 diseases. Before we arrive at the 7th, which is perhaps the most visible, most immediately distressing thing a chicken keeper can encounter, there's something worth sitting with for a moment. And everything we've discussed so far involves plants that work systemically, that protect from the inside out: gut health, immune function, antimicrobial activity in the respiratory tract. You can't see any of it happening. You just see healthy birds. The 7th disease is different. You can see it on the surface of the bird. And because you can see it, it produces a particular kind of panic in chicken keepers who encounter it for the first time. Disease 7. Northern fowl mite, Ornithonissus sylviarum. These are tiny, fast-moving parasites that live on the bird itself, not in the coop, not in the environment, but on the actual skin of the chicken, deep in the feathers near the vent. An infestation looks like black pepper scattered around the vent area. A severe infestation causes anemia. It causes chickens to scratch themselves raw. It causes stress-related drops in egg production, weight loss, secondary bacterial infections where the skin breaks. In laying flocks, a bad mite infestation during peak production can drop egg output by 30% or more within a week. Modern treatment involves chemical dusts and sprays. Permethrin is the most common. It works, but it requires repeated application, and in organic operations, it's simply not an option. Here is where the Amish approach does something that seems almost too simple to believe until you look at the mechanism. One of the plants observed consistently in and around Amish chicken coops, growing in the dust-bathing areas, dried and strewn into nest boxes, sometimes rubbed directly onto the birds by observant farmers, is a plant that most people in North America know only as a garden ornamental. Lavender. Lavandula angustifolia. And before you dismiss it as folk remedy territory, the mechanism here is real and well documented. Lavender essential oil, which the plant continuously volatilizes from its leaves and flowers, contains linalool and linalool oxide, compounds that function as natural insect neurotoxins. Insects, including mites, have a fundamentally different nervous system than vertebrates. Compounds that are harmlessly aromatic to mammals are neurotoxic to insects at contact concentrations. Chickens that regularly dust bathe in soil where dried lavender has been incorporated are coating their feathers with these volatile compounds. The mites encounter them when moving through the feather structure. Lavender placed in nest boxes slowly releases linalool into the enclosed space, at concentrations toxic to mites but completely safe for the hens nesting there. There's a secondary mechanism too. The deep-rooted instinct of chickens to seek out aromatic plants for dust bathing is not random behavior. Researchers studying wild jungle fowl, the ancestor of domestic chickens, have observed this same behavior. The birds select specific plants for their dust-bathing sites. They seem to have an innate knowledge that certain plants provide protection. Domestic chickens haven't lost this instinct. They still seek these plants out if they're available. Amish farmers keep lavender growing near dust-bathing areas, partly by tradition, and partly because they've noticed that flocks with access to it almost never suffer severe mite infestations. The birds are being protected continuously, as a side effect of natural behavior, by a plant that costs nothing after the initial planting and requires very little maintenance. There's something about this that deserves attention beyond the practical. The whole picture of what we've been describing: chicory for gut health, elderberry for respiratory immunity, stinging nettle for immune competence, wormwood for bacterial resistance, black cumin for parasite control, thyme for chronic respiratory disease, lavender for external parasites. This isn't a system someone designed. It's a system that evolved. It grew from generations of farmers watching their birds, noticing what they ate, where they lingered, which plants they sought out when something was wrong. Traditional farmers weren't making observations in a vacuum. They were reading their animals constantly, noticing correlations over the span of decades and generations. They didn't need the chemistry. They had the evidence of their own eyes, accumulated over time. Here is the question this entire video has been building toward. Why did we stop? Why did a century of agricultural science, which produced extraordinary advances in so many areas, simultaneously eliminate from common practice the accumulated plant knowledge of 10,000 years of farming? The answer is probably simpler than we'd like it to be. Chemistry happened. Chemistry was faster, more reliable, more easily standardized, more profitable. And in the transition to industrial-scale poultry production, the diverse foraging landscape that made plant-based animal health possible simply ceased to exist. Concrete floors, in controlled environments, 10,000 birds per building. There is no fence line to plant chicory along. There is no dust-bathing area to scatter lavender in. But for everyone who isn't running an industrial operation, for the homesteader with 30 birds, the pastured poultry farmer with a few hundred, the backyard chicken keeper trying to keep a small flock healthy without a veterinary bill every other month, the landscape is different. The fence lines exist. The foraging areas exist. The possibility of growing these plants, of creating the kind of living environment that makes chicken health self-sustaining rather than perpetually managed, exists entirely. The Amish didn't invent this knowledge. They inherited it. And remarkably, in a world that threw most of it away, they kept it. There's a practical note worth ending on. Because all of this is only useful if you can actually do something with it. None of these plants require expert knowledge to grow. Chicory self-sows aggressively once established. Scatter seed in a disturbed area in fall, and it will be there in spring. Stinging nettle spreads readily along moist, nitrogen-rich soil, under old fence posts near the compost pile. Wormwood is a hardy perennial that needs almost no care once established. Black cumin is an annual that self-sows if you let even a few plants go to seed. Thyme spreads as ground cover in sunny areas. Lavender is long-lived and drought-tolerant. Elderberry grows fast from cuttings or transplants and will be producing berries within 2 to 3 years. You don't need to establish all of them at once. Start with 1 or 2. Plant chicory along the fence line this fall. Establish a thyme patch in the foraging area. Let the stinging nettle that's already growing near your compost pile stay where it is instead of pulling it. Watch your birds. Notice where they go when you open the gate in the morning. Notice what they seek out. Trust a little that the instincts of an animal shaped over millions of years of coevolution with plants might know something worth paying attention to. The Amish didn't build a complicated system, they maintained a simple one. Plants and animals living together the way they were shaped to live, in a relationship old enough that neither side has forgotten the terms. The terms were always about health, about resilience, about the kind of quiet robustness that doesn't need to fight disease, because it never gave disease easy ground to stand on. That knowledge was never lost. It was just waiting, growing wild along fence lines, for someone to notice it again.